Welcome to the Fantasy Football Fanatics podcast with your hosts Griffin Palmer, CJ Hickman, Jason Cabrera, and Ryan Mitchell.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the show. It is Tuesday, September 26th. This is the Fantasy Football Fanatics podcast, the official podcast of the fantasyfootballfanatics.com. I'm your host, Griffin Palmer, joined as always by CJ, the Hitman Hickman, and Jason Cabrera. What is up, guys?
What is going on, man?
Not much, man. What a crazy week of fantasy and football in general. And we'll get into quite a bit of that. You know, topped off with a little bit of a surprise game for the Monday night game, but I know Jason doesn't want to talk about that, so we'll just keep on moving. I think Jason is about to commit fantasy suicide over there, so we'll just keep on moving. But, yeah, we have an amazing show for you guys today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at our studs and duds from week number 3. Of course, the top waiver wire targets from week number 4. All the top headlines from around the league, the works. As always, I'm Griffin. We have CJ. We have Jason. This is the Fantasy Football Fanatics podcast. You can find us on all forms of social media. We're streaming all over the place on iTunes, Stitcher. You can follow us on Twitter at the FF Fanatics. Facebook's at facebook.com/thefantasyfootballfanatics, so on and so forth. We're going to move right into our warm-up question of the day, which is, what was your big takeaway from week number 3? And mine was simply what I just stated. What a crazy upside-down week. I think less than a third of the games went the way that the experts, the analysts, and Vegas predicted that they would, and a lot of big blowouts. But on the other hand, we're starting to see some of these teams really kind of come on. So I thought it was actually a great week of football. Number of overtime games, some really close finishes, some dramatic comebacks, and of course some unexpected blowouts. So some of that led to great fantasy production, which is why we're here. But as a whole, it was a very unexpected week through most of the weekend. What were you guys' thoughts?
Man, wow. A couple rants I have, man. First and foremost, what the crap with the Vikings, man. I mean, we go into this week thinking that, once again we get to know a little beforehand about the Sam Bradford situation. Now Case Keenum is there. It's going to be a good defense with the Buccaneers, and Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen both have good games, and they're on your benches just scoring points for you, and you're pulling out your hair. That's one. Another game that really frustrated me was the Chiefs versus the Chargers. Phillip Rivers, what in the bluest of hell are you doing with 3 picks against a division opponent, people that you know that you should be playing better, and you just refuse to throw the ball? Jameis Winston had the same amount of interceptions as you and still scored more fantasy points. Oh, my gosh. And then lastly for me is these Raiders. I don't know if I can just throw that game as a wash, or you just went overconfident to DC and just got the tar kicked out of you. And the offensive line that all of us have put up there to rival the Cowboys offensive line, they had no heart. They showed no fight. Wide receivers, guys that we love, Crabtree, Mari Cooper, absolutely invisible, did nothing. And at the end of the day, the guy that stood out of all of them at that receiving core, Jared Cook, a guy that has been a ghost town these last couple weeks. So that's just me.
Yeah. My big one was going to be Oakland. I mean, 118 yards on 19 attempts for Derek Carr. That's not good. That's straight up bad. I don't understand what was going on. The Redskins just shellacked them, and it was. They even had Samaje Perine out there. It was like let's get him involved finally. And of course, Chris Thompson had a fantastic game, and so that was one thing. The next thing is really Miami, you can't beat the Jets. That is pathetic.
Yeah.
That was absolutely pathetic. I mean, here's a team actively trying to lose. And it's like you can't actively try to lose better than we can lose while trying to win. That's pretty bad. That is pretty bad. And if I was a Miami Dolphins fan, I'd be extremely depressed right now. But don't worry, I am extremely depressed right now because I'm a Cardinals fan, and I can tell you something right now. I have not seen this team play this poorly in a while. I mean, started great, everything was working, they were moving the ball, but one of my takeaways from this week is a lot of these teams, they seem to be trying to overthink themselves. You know, for what I'm talking about is like, look at Oakland. You know, you got Marshawn Lynch there. He's obviously going to be your best back, but they kept pushing away from him and trying to do other things. It's like they're trying to outsmart themselves. You dance with the girl that brought you to the dance. You don't try to play a different game. You don't try to play like a different kind of a team. Same thing goes for Arizona. You know, and we've been complaining about this. I know Griffin and I have been complaining about this since the beginning of this year. Where is Larry Fitzgerald? Why have they not thrown the ball to him?
Yep.
In this game, they finally did. You know, but it's too little, too late. You know, you have got to get that run game going, and you have got to get that offensive line straight. Bottom line with the Arizona Cardinals is Jared Veldheer is a left tackle. He was a very, very good left tackle. He held down that left side of the line for a couple of years. He was the best guy on our offensive line, and they move him to the right. Then DJ Humphries gets hurt. And the idea was that DJ Humphries is a more upside athlete, which I get. DJ Humphries gets hurt. The automatic thing that should have happened was Veldheer goes back to the left, and you move John Wetzel in as that backup tackle on the right. And they didn't do that. And you could see that wasn't working. 3-man rushes all game long.
That's what I was going to say.
They were getting to Carson Palmer.
Yeah.
5 guys on our offensive line can't stop 3 rushers. It's absolutely pathetic. And watching the frustration boil over on Carson Palmer's face and on Fitzgerald's face. I mean, Fitzgerald had 146 yards receiving and a touchdown. He had a fantastic game.
Yeah.
You know?
It was not a great showing in prime time at home against, you know, a conference opponent. So, yeah, what are you going to do? But again, this all ties into what I kind of wanted to talk about as we move into our studs and duds category. Look, we had some amazing and unexpected performances so far, and you know, really, this is what to expect. And we talk about this all the time, and we've been mentioning this the last couple shows, especially through the first quarter and really up to the first half of the year. You know, all the things we talked about before. This all falls in line with how most of these teams, most of these starters, they didn't really play in the preseason. A lot of them are still trying to find themselves. A lot of these teams are still finding their identity. So, you know, we're predicting these things based on the small sample size that we have, and sometimes it ends up being wrong because it was matchup based, it was divisional, maybe they just had an off week. So, you know, we're going to do our best to analyze the trends and what happens, give you guys informed insight, but bottom line, we're not, the teams that we're seeing now are not the way they're going to be this point in like another month or 2 months or towards the end of the year. It's going to be completely different. So, you know, we'll do our best to analyze things as we go, but you know, it's going to be what it is. And also a point I want to bring up, and this is something Jason likes to say all the time, coaches lie, as most Jordan Howard owners will attest to, as we'll get to that. But let's start with our studs of the week, our quarterback position. And for the second week in a row, the freaking top spot goes to Tom freaking Brady. 40, and this is, again, 6-point per passing touchdown leagues that we base this off of, standard scoring beyond that. 45.72 fantasy points. He had 378 yards and 5 touchdowns on 25 completions. Wow. Okay, so nobody really expected him to do that. I mean, yes, at home, but against the Houston Texans defense, and also wasn't expected to need to do that because that Texans offense had been a little uninspiring based on last week when they were playing the Bengals. So this was just phenomenal. This is why Tom Brady went as a top 3 fantasy quarterback, and why he is, you know, appropriately located there through this point through the season. What were you guys' thoughts here? I honestly, look, I didn't tell anybody to sit Tom Brady. That would have been crazy. But I definitely didn't see him going out and putting up the top quarterback performance yet again.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be I thought it was going to be what it was. I mean, it was a back and forth matchup. I did expect the Texan defense to play a little harder. I mean, they did at the start of it. I mean, Clowney, you know, got that fumble return and took it to the house. They did get in Brady's face, but at the end of the day, once again, when it comes to these matchups that you like, man, you know, this is a tough matchup, just go ahead and just trust Belichick and Brady that they're going to do what they do. Because this is a team that they saw in the playoffs this past year, and they did the exact same thing. The Houston's defense was playing them hard, and then once the Patriots figured out what they're doing, they had made adjustments, and then they just started beating the brakes off of them. And this is exactly what happened in this game. So, I mean, Tom Brady, 40 years old, the man is playing the game like he's 20-something, man. He's looking good.
Yes, he is. Tom Brady is on pace to do something that he has not done in his career. He is currently on pace to break 5,000 passing yards, and as you said, he's 40 years old. So, look, I say this all the time. I hate Tom Brady and I hate the Patriots, just as a conference rivalry perspective. But you have to respect the guy. He's doing something right. So, Tom Brady, your number one fantasy quarterback. If you played against Tom Brady, odds are you probably didn't win this week. That was a monster performance. Coming right behind him, though, Russell Wilson in a game that looked like quite the dud until really halfway into the second half when they really started to turn it on. 41.5 fantasy points. He went for 373 yards and 4 passing touchdowns, added another 26 yards rushing. Massive monster performance from Russell Wilson. And, all the things that we've been talking about, the Seahawks, they don't look like themselves. Oh, what's wrong with Seattle? This, that, the other. Well, a lot of the trends that we've seen through the last couple of years with Pete Carroll and the Seahawks, they start off slow. It takes them a couple weeks to find their identity, and then they get going. And, really, as we already mentioned, this is kind of the case with all the teams because they are all still kind of getting into their game shape, getting their rapport up and going, getting their timing down right. So I expect this to be the trend. I think Russell Wilson, he will start returning on that top 12, really. Most people took him as a top 7, top 8 fantasy quarterback, and especially with his running production, why wouldn't he give you this turn on investment? He's going to run the ball. The offensive line is garbage. So Russell Wilson, breathe easy, Russell Wilson fans out there. And your third stud of the week was my sit of the week, and I probably should have seen this coming just because I hate my Ravens so much sometimes. We're such a bad road team. Blake freaking Bortles in London goes off for 35.5 fantasy points, 244 yards, not the best yardage, but 4 passing touchdowns. He was not intercepted once. He was not sacked once. The Ravens showed up, and except for the thing is that they didn't show up. They looked gassed. They didn't look gassed, but they looked like their heads weren't in the game, like they were tired when they took the field, and it showed throughout the game. It was a really, really bad game. The Ravens notoriously are not a great road team, and we've seen this. We talked about this leading up to the show. They're not very good when they have to make long-distance travels in the past. I don't know if it's something that the team's not doing right with acclimating them with sleep or energy or nutrition or who knows what it is, but this has been a long-running trend. So like when we make West Coast trips, this is a problem. Well, apparently when you fly over the Atlantic, another 6-7 hour flight, similar effects. So probably should have seen this coming, but the matchup was too perfect. And I looked around the industry just to make sure it wasn't me being a crazy homer, and everyone was on pace. Like this was the locked in, like easy pick of the week for most analysts, and it did not work out. 44-7 game. Embarrassing. So yeah, Blake Bortles, if you had the balls, the stones, the cojones to start him, you're just in a 2-quarterback league, hey, you got an awesome performance out of Blake Bortles, one you probably didn't expect. So those were your top stud quarterbacks of the week. Let's move on to the running back position, where we start with the guy we already talked about a bit on our Friday show, Todd Gurley, 32, almost 33 points, 28 rushing attempts, 113 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, add on another 36 yards receiving, and 1 receiving touchdown. So 3 touchdowns on the day. Todd Gurley, guys, what are your thoughts on Todd Gurley going forward through the season? Because he has another really, really good matchup coming up this week, but then he's got about 6 really tough matchups coming up. Are you, and this is something we're going to be talking a lot on Patreon, but what do you think about Todd Gurley? Are you holding him? I'm getting a lot of questions. Do you move him? Do you trade him? What are your thoughts with Todd Gurley?
I've got him in the Dynasty League, and I've been talking about him since last year, and obviously had a horrible year last year, but I think we're seeing that with a better situation, which is he is on a much better offensive-minded team this year. They're utilizing him in the passing game. They're utilizing him as much as they possibly can. He's actually got time to do things that he needs to do. I think you keep him. I think you hold on to him because he does have pretty good matchups going forward this season. And this offense is just going to get better as we go forward. I'm starting to consider picking up Jared Goff and stashing him on my bench because I like what I'm seeing from this offense. This is a quarterback-friendly offense that's going to give him the opportunity to actually operate a little bit. He actually has quite a few weapons back there. So if I've got Todd Gurley, which I do in one of my leagues, I hold on to him for a while.
CJ, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, man, it's tough for me to think about, trading good. For me, it's hard for me to start trading away good players that are on good trends right now. I mean, this is something that I saw and I expected Sean McVay to be able to do, to be able to turn this whole thing around with Todd Gurley, and exactly what he's doing. So, unless I'm like drastically, like desperately hurting at a position like a wide receiver or a quarterback or something like that, or even another running back, it's hard to try to take one person that that's doing good, and by the looks of his playoff schedule for you, he's going to be looking good those weeks too. So it's kind of hard for me to be able to do that and try to trade him away when he's doing so good. So I'm kind of actually in Jason's corner, ride him out and keep him on your team.
I'm just gonna preach caution, of course, because he just had an amazing career week. But now next week he's got Dallas, which going into the week seemed really good, but after what we saw they just did with the Cardinals, that could be a tougher matchup in Dallas.
I think that's a wash, though. I mean, we talked about it, and you watched the film. Cardinals' offensive line was struggling.
I agree.
I think that Rams' offensive line is drastically improved in the Cardinals.
Yep. But then you've got Seattle, Jacksonville, Arizona, then a bye week, then the Giants, Texans, and then the Vikings. So those are 6 really tough games. Then you've got the Saints, which is pretty nice. And then you have the Cardinals again, Eagles, Seahawks, Titans. So, I mean, he's got basically, except for 1 or 2 bright spots in there, really tough defenses throughout the rest of his season. So I understand the argument and the concern with, do I move Todd Gurley? But, I mean, in reality, let's see how he does against these tough defenses. I mean, this could be the guy that we thought he was going into last season, where he was going in a number of instances as the number 1 pick in fantasy. And, I mean, it's really hard to find workhorse running backs, and that's what he is. And there's no one behind him. There's people who kind of come in and spell him when he needs to catch his breath, but other than that, he is the running back in this offense. If he is healthy and he's available, he will be out there running the ball for you and being involved in the passing game this season, which is great. And Sean McVay seems to be getting more creative with how he uses them. So I ride with Todd Gurley. Will it be pretty? No. Will he have a lot more weeks like this one? Probably not. The real downer, of course, being that he doesn't play the 49ers again until week 17, so probably you're outside of your fantasy season, which is kind of a downer. So what were you want to say, CJ?
I was going to say it, man. These division games, as we've been seeing, if week 3 say anything, these division games definitely go either way. So that game against the Seahawks, it might look right just off paper that it's probably scary. You probably want to sit them. But, hey, you saw what DeMarco Murray did on them. Granted, that's not a division opponent or even a conference opponent, but they ran the ball really well, and that's right now what the Rams are doing. They're running the ball really well, and they're getting the passing game involved.
So we'll see. And if you are trying to bundle Todd Gurley, look, I understand. This was a 32.9 point week. So you're probably not going to be able to demand more for him than right now. So if you get great value, if you're trading him as a number 1 running back and you're able to get another number 1 and something else for him, go for it. Because again, he has a really tough schedule and people are going to be trying to buy him right now. But it's case by case. I am not actively trying to move him. So I'll put it that way. Let's move on to your next stud of the week, and this was, unfortunately, CJ's sit of the week, Jordan Howard. And I don't blame him at all, because based on everything we were hearing, odds are he probably was not going to play. But then he goes out there, has 23 rushing attempts for 138 yards and 2 touchdowns. So at this point, I have to ask, was this all a charade? Were they lying to us? Was he healthy the whole time? Or was this just a amazing performance by a talented young running back? I mean, nobody saw this coming. He was a sit across the board. Everyone thought if he did play, he would be hobbled, and he looked really pretty darn good out there. What are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know what the heck was going on out there. The matchup was in my favor. The players was in my favor, and then all of a sudden, Jordan Howard just goes out there and just has a monster game, and this goes like, oh yeah, those first 2 weeks. Those don't mean anything. I'm just going to go out here and ball out like I've been doing last year. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, Steelers didn't have an answer for this man. And it's very surprising because they've been really stingy these last couple of weeks. Granted, they've been playing some offenses that haven't yet got their stride or got their footing, but you don't take those two games and then just expect them to just just let the floodgates open up when it came to Jordan Howard just getting fantasy points for him.
Yeah.
This is one of those things where we're watching how the season's shaking out, and it's not shaking out cleanly. It's not shaking out like in the past. You've been able to say this guy's going to have a good year, and then that guy would have a good year, or he'd have a couple of bad matchups, or and all kinds of. This year has been a little bit different. It's been people have been just amazing, and then awful, and then gone, and then amazing again, and it's very black or white. It's really hard to kind of get a handle on. I mean, like you mentioned, he was the sit of the week, and it was a decent choice, but he balled out. I mean, it's frustrating, and I understand the frustration, and I share it. You just have to keep an eye on it and see what happens going forward. And as Griffin already alluded to, this is not going to be the trend going forward necessarily. So you have to keep an eye on what that's going to be.
Yeah. So if you left Jordan Howard on your bench, know that you are not alone. I mean, and not just listeners of our show. I looked around the industry, like I said, analysts from every single credible website, TV show, radio station, everywhere. Everyone was saying the exact same thing we were. Jordan Howard, he was spotted in a sling, a limited participant, and goes off. So there's something fishy going on in Chicago. Next guy, or your third stud running back, was Chris Thompson. This is a guy who I talked about a bit last show, and I believe, didn't one of you guys say that you were going to pick him up? I don't remember who.
I did. I picked him up, and I put him on my bench like an idiot, and he sat there, and I wasted 27 points. So yeah.
Well, he was your waiver wire target last week, wasn't he?
It was
no. I think it was CJ's.
CJ. So
yeah,
it was. Yeah, that's right. Look, I openly said, on Friday's show, because people asked why we didn't talk about him much more than just briefly in the waiver section, because the volume was just simply not there. But in reality, I mean, look, we have Rob Kelly, who's now down. We have Samaje Perine, who is hurt. And so now Chris Thompson's looking like he's going to be that guy. Now, this is a team that does not want to give him the rock 20 times a game because he is a much smaller back. They're worried that he's going to get hurt. He's going to get run down. So, Mac Brown's on the roster, and, and we'll talk about this more in the news, but Rob Kelly, he's still considered day-to-day. And Samaje Perine, it turns out he didn't break his hand. It's just bruised. So that's something. But, Chris Thompson definitely needs to be rostered at this point. And look, he did it again. Then this is what scares me. He had 8 rushing attempts for 38 yards, but he also had 6 receptions on 7 targets for 150 yards and another receiving touchdown. So he is shifty. He is really, really elusive, and he has a nose for the end zone. He reminds me of Tyreek Hill from last year. So volume and work share and target share really, really scare me. But, the production speaks for himself, and sometimes you have to ride that hot hand. And Chris Thompson, he is a top 3 running back in fantasy right now. So, what more is there to say? I now officially have to say, you have to roster him, and odds are, I honestly don't think I'd start him in my running back 1 or 2 spot because of volume, but he's definitely a flex-worthy guy. So, Chris Thompson goes out and puts up your number 3 performance on the week, and he is the number 3 running back on the season. So that's something. Let's move on to the wide receiver position where we have, and this kind of pains me because I told a couple of people that I'd probably sit him this week, Stefon Diggs. 29.3 fantasy points. He went 8 for 11 for 173 freaking yards and 2 touchdowns. So a lot of people I know out there sat Stefon Diggs, and I know that was the advice I gave a number of people, and, the math was there. Case Keenum looked really bad, and this was a tough matchup. But, as we found out as the weekend rolled in, that a lot of starters on that, intimidating, we all thought, Tampa Bay defense were not playing. A lot of them were hurt. A number of their other star players got hurt during the game itself, and freaking Stefon Diggs, he feasted. Was this an outlier? Probably, but, can we ever sit Stefon Diggs after this? Probably not. So it's an amazing performance. What are your guys' thoughts? Because I know none of us saw this coming.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that doesn't trust Stephon Diggs. So he had a great week, and that's good. But I preach caution. He hasn't been consistent. So if he does this 2 weeks in a row, then yeah, sure, I'll start looking for him. But otherwise, I just preach caution. This could be a complete outlier.
Well, he is. Go ahead, CJ.
I'm about to say, if you take out that first game with Case Keenum, and you actually put in Bradford, if you just eliminate week 2 and you put week 1 and this week together, this is what Stephon Diggs is doing. He's elevated and stepped up this game in this offense, and he's become that guy. I mean, Adam Thielen is still your guy that gets the yardage and you want more touchdowns, but Stephon Diggs is finding a way to get into the end zone and making some athletic catches and just balling out at that wide receiver position in this offense. Now, I think for me that will make me more comfortable, with playing Stephon Diggs going forward, even with trying to figure out what's going on with Sam Bradford, is knowing that Sam Bradford is in this offense. I mean, Case Keenum, we saw last year, he's serviceable, but as more people get game film on him and start game planning on him, he gets exposed and he starts making mistakes, and he's going to cost you. That's one thing that I don't like about this Vikings offense is Case Keenum, because I do see him going to get exposed and it's going to cost me on fantasy. But if Sam Bradford's in there, Stephon Diggs and this whole offense is money, and we saw that Monday night, week 1.
Yeah, I mean, like you kind of were alluding to, CJ, if you throw out week 2 against the Steelers, he has 2 20-point performances, 20.7 in week 1 and 29.3 in week 3. And this is standard scoring, of course. But, I mean, that makes Stephon Diggs, even with that crappy week 2, the number 1 receiver in fantasy football right now, over Antonio Brown by a decent margin. So, I mean, there's something to be said there. And, yes, I agree that, obviously, we want Sam Bradford back. Sam Bradford is a much better quarterback than Case Keenum. That's why he's the starter. But, we're not sure when that's going to be. His status is kind of up in the air even right now, going into week number 4. But, I mean, at least, Case Keenum he looked really good in this game, and Tampa Bay's defense was banged up, but he's also not playing world-beater defenses. The next 3 games, and Sam Bradford could come back in any one of these. He's got Detroit at home, on the road in Chicago, and then Green Bay at home. So, I mean, he could easily, yes, they're all divisional, but he could easily have good performances all 3 of those weeks. And so I'm most likely firing up Stephon Diggs. We stay, like I just said, ride the hot hand, and Stephon Diggs, I mean, he's on fire. He's the number 1 receiver in fantasy. So, I mean, what are you going to do? We'll see. It could be very wrong, but, I mean, it's worth noting. Your number 2 fantasy wide receiver finally had a good game. Brandon Cooks, CJ, your guy. 27.1 points. 5 for 7, not a huge target share, 131 yards, and here's what did it, 2 touchdowns as well. Great performance. CJ, anything that stood out to you here, that why Brandon Cooks may have broken out in this game, or is this just one of those games that we talked about that he's going to have from time to time?
It's one of these things that with this new receiver coming into this offense, that it was going to take some time for him and Tom Brady to get a maturation going on, start getting that chemistry, and start getting a comfort level with each other. And now with the with the departure of with the going down of Edelman and then Amendola going down, somebody needs to step up. And this is the guy that they brought in to be the dude, to be the guy, a guy that I believe was going to be the alpha dog in this wide receiver core, especially now with Edelman going down. He needs to do it because he has the talent to be able to do it, and that's exactly what happened. He stepped up, and I really like Cooks going forward.
Yeah, Amendola did not look good on his first week back from his concussion this week. So, Brandon Cooks definitely was able to capitalize on all that. Anything you want to add, Jason, before we move on to the next guy?
Just one thing I'll say. Yeah, Cooks looks good finally. And also, Chris Hogan's starting to look really good, too. So, just another name to keep an eye on.
I've been telling a lot of people to start Chris Hogan the last 2 weeks, and he has paid off. So I like that a lot. Last stud of the week, top 3 here. We have Sammy Watkins again from that Thursday night game. He had 6 receptions, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did leave early in the concussion protocol, but I mean, this is the Sammy Watkins that we've always known he was capable of being. 22.6 fantasy points, freak athlete, amazing talent, injury prone, and not necessarily in the best circumstance or system in the past with Tyrod Taylor in Buffalo. I think that he could be in a better situation, especially with the offensive coordinator now in Los Angeles. So, I mean, is this what we're going to see every single week from Sammy Watkins? I would say no. But, I mean, definitely streamable. I like Sammy Watkins. He's got a very high ceiling. I think we would all agree on that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, anything you guys want to add before we move on?
No. I mean, talked about it a lot the last Friday show, so you should probably go check that out.
Yep, and let's move on to the tight end position, where your number one fantasy tight end on the week, a guy who literally helped no one because he's owned in 0.1% of leagues. So chances are literally non-existent that you started him, and that is Mercedes Lewis, a guy who has scored, I think it was 3 touchdowns over the last 3 years, and he scored 3 touchdowns on Sunday against my Ravens, who are not only a very good defense, but also very stingy against the tight end. But could have fooled me. 4 for 5 was all it took to go 62 yards and 3 touchdowns, so that's disgusting. I'm not rushing out to pick him up. This was an anomaly.
I'm about to say, you know what it was? It was me disrespecting him on the Friday show when it starts and sits. When I almost forgot his name and that tight end position. That's why he balls so
heard
hard.
that.
Forgive me, sir. I'm incredibly sorry. I'm incredibly sorry for that.
That's pretty bad. Your number 2 fantasy tight end on the week, Rob Gronkowski. No surprise there. He went 8 for 10, 89 yards and a touchdown, so that's pretty good, 14.9. And then Ryan Griffin, 11.9 fantasy points, 5 for 6, 61 yards and a touchdown. I mean, someone's got to catch the ball there in Houston, and if DeAndre Hopkins is getting triple covered and the running backs aren't getting open either, so why not throw to the tight end? There's a long history of doing that in Houston. So Ryan Griffin, the beneficiary, with C.J. Fedorowicz being down. So, yeah, those are your starts. And one last thing I want to bring up, because I meant to talk about this in the quarterback section. What is happening in fantasy football right now? What kind of world are we living in? I mean, we're talking, again, here's some of your top 12 fantasy quarterbacks from this week. Obviously, we talked about Blake Bortles. Number 4 was Case Keenum. We have Brian Hoyer, Jacoby Brissett, Jared Goff. I mean, Deshaun Kaiser even was a top 14 quarterback. So, I mean, this you hear this a lot, and people say fantasy is stupid, and this is kind of why, because not all these guys had great days, but they had good fantasy days. And just in general, that the fact that a number of those guys had better days than Drew Brees, I mean, good Lord. So, and Matt Ryan, they had better days than Ben Roethlisberger. Well, Ben Roethlisberger didn't have a good day in general, but you know what I'm saying. So, yeah, this is why I believe in streaming, just saying. Let's move on to the duds, where there was, we were hoping for a week that was going to be a little bit easier on the dud section, but the list just go on and on and on. And this will be the case until these offenses start clicking. We start seeing more offensive production. Though maybe not, because there's a lot of good defenses this year. Number 1, oh, God. Nobody was starting him anyway, but Joe Flacco, negative 2.88 fantasy points, was pulled from the game. They said it was because his back was starting to get re-aggravated. He was getting hit a number of times, and possible, yes, but he was pulled. That game was out of hand. There was literally no reason to keep him in that game. So, yeah, Joe Flacco, he was a big pooper. Phillip Rivers, he sunk a number 1 of my teams. I believe you guys as well. A number of listeners who are Phillip Rivers truthers out there. 3.48 fantasy points. And, of course, if he has a bad week, you can bet a number of his weapons did as well, which we'll get into. Derek Carr, which we already talked about, 7.22 fantasy points. The Raiders completely stalled out in Washington. It makes no sense. Trevor Siemian, 7.56. You know, we said he's better at home than he is on the road. Cam Newton, which I think is honestly droppable. I doubt you're going to drop him because, I mean, you could probably trade him for something, but 8.28 fantasy points. He does not look right. I don't know if it's the shoulder. I don't know if it's the offense. I don't know if it's the loss of Greg Olsen. I don't know if it's his offensive line. I don't know what it is exactly, but Cam Newton, he is what I thought he was going to be coming into the season, and he has looked really, really bad. Besides one good stat line, which came from like a busted screen pass that was taken to the house, which padded his stats, he has not looked good. I don't know. I'll throw it to you guys. CJ, you're a much bigger fan of Cam Newton than I think either one of us are, right, Jason? So, CJ, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, man, it's tough right now. This, if any of the matchups going forward, this was the one. I mean, you saw the Saints have been struggling weeks on weeks. They, like I said, they have a young secondary and everything. I thought this would be the game that these Panthers put everything together as far as their offense. That that's kind of not been all together. They can put stuff together and put a nice showing out, get some confidence going, and then, start putting some games together. And then it was just, they go out there and Cam just did not look comfortable. He did not look comfortable throwing the ball to his guys. He couldn't find his people, and it kind of hurt him when Kevin Benjamin went down too. So now he's throwing the ball to Funches, at Dixon, and then trying to find the running backs. And the Saints defense just got stingy on him, and they started getting to him. And then once you start hitting the quarterback, man, you started getting in his head. And then this is a guy that's still, recovering from a shoulder surgery. So it was just downhill after that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you. It's very concerning. Dangerous Robinson, Cam is hurting your fantasy team.
Safe to drop in your eyes?
Man, I gotta agree with you.
Drop
Probably,
him.
most likely, you gotta drop. I hate to do it, but you gotta drop him right now. He's not getting you fantasy points, and then while he's still, this injury's still in his head, he's not gonna be no good for you.
I mean, he just doesn't look right, and of course, he's not running the ball. I mean, he hasn't even run for 50 yards on the season yet. So, yeah, that's something to be concerned about. And then the final dud of the week. Mike Glennon, a guy. At what point do they bench Mike Glennon and put in Mitch Trubisky? Because he has been trending downwards every single week. He went from 14.5 fantasy points to 12 to 8.5, and that's been his trend. He's trending the wrong direction. So I mean,
when was he ever a stud? Like, why?
He's not been a stud. He's been a dud since we started the season.
Why are we even mentioning him? I mean, he should be garbage.
Because he was a starting quarterback.
Because he's a starting quarterback in 2 quarterback leagues, which we talk about because we include all forms of fantasy football here. And he's been a streaming candidate.
He's a waste of space. We shouldn't even.
He's a waste of space.
We can't even get those 5 seconds back if you mention him.
Well, I'm just saying, might be seeing Mitch Trubisky soon. I don't know. I talked about this a lot in the offseason. His contract's basically a 1-year deal, and I think they wouldn't be afraid to see what they have in the young rookie. So, yeah, with that, let's move on to the running back duds of the week, which, again, there were so many. Terrence West, 0.6 fantasy points. We heard all about how it was going to be Buck Allen starting. Then Terrence West was active and he played. And if you plugged him in, obviously that didn't work out. Darren Sproles, we'll get to that. Some sad news with Darren Sproles, but only good for 1.1 point. Jaquiz Rogers, 1.5. Oh, man, Tampa Bay is probably really wishing that they didn't have that week 1 bye so they could have Doug Martin back. Chris Johnson, 2.1 fantasy points last night. Not a great performance at all.
Chris.
Matt Forte, 2.5. Jay Ajayi, 2.5 fantasy points. This was, as you said,
sorry.
Yeah, this was Jason's start, but I endorsed it. We were all behind this. This was a matchup that made perfect sense. And, if we could go back and do it again, I would recommend it again because everything was there. So, this is just one of those dud performances, which we break down more on the Patreon show. But good Lord. Miami Dolphins on the road in a divisional game. I mean, on one hand, the writing should have been on the wall, but on the other hand, all the stats and the trends were backing up this play. So, I mean, look, he was started in over 90% of leagues, and that means over 90% of you were let down, unless you were playing against him, which then that was good. Marshawn Lynch, 2.6. I'm getting really concerned with Marshawn Lynch because it's been a trend, and I know it's been that they're trying to be careful with him. They're trying to save him for the long haul. They're trying to do a rotation, but he is not in the game, and when they're playing from behind, he's not the one that's getting the ball. And there was,
the frustrating thing is this is beast mode. He's a beast. You don't try to limit the beast. You don't try to sit the beast down and keep the beast calm. You need to feed the beast. And I think that's the problem. They're not using him. You've got to put him in the game. You've got to use him. Otherwise, what happened this week is what's going to happen. You're going to flatten out. You're not going to get a running game going. And that's what happened. Put Marshawn Lynch in the game. Stop playing games.
Well,
I felt like this was like Tony Stark and Captain America talking about the Hulk. And Jason was just talking about that. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm frustrated. He's one of my running backs, and he's just sitting there, and and they're not using him. It's like, what are you gonna do? You got one of the top running backs in the past decade, and you're sitting him on the bench. Come on, man.
I did warn you about this. I did warn you though.
I mean, yeah, obviously Jason has all the reason to be the most upset here. Jason, you are by far and away the highest on him coming into the season.
I was.
I mean, he was your number 3 running back, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
So
he was number 3 overall.
Yeah, and here, this is why it's so concerning. Marshawn Lynch rushed the ball 6 times and was nowhere to be seen while they were playing from behind. So, I mean, it's
absolutely disrespectful.
It's a huge, and there were times where they were in the red zone and he was not in the game. He's 99.9% owned, and it's
the commentator even mentioned that. He's like, they're in the red zone. Where is Marshawn Lynch? How many times does this have to happen until people start figuring out Marshawn? Because the same thing happened to the Seahawks. Remember that play at the end of the Super Bowl? Mm-hmm. You know, you're on the 2-yard line, you hand the ball to Beast.
Yeah.
I mean, to the defense, I mean, there was a couple goal line stances for the Raiders. They tried to get him in there, and they got absolutely no push. They got no wiggle room, and that's shocking. Once again, when we talk about this offensive line.
Well, I will say though, on the opposite end of the spectrum, no one else on that team carried the ball more than 2 times, so he still had the workload, which is really sad because, again, 6 rushing attempts, and he was the lead rusher on that team. So, Oakland they need to have a more balanced attack. I know a lot of that was because they got down early, but, I mean, that's a huge problem right there. So, Marshawn Lynch owners, look, I preach caution. Maybe play the matchups until you see it. Have some patience, but I don't think he's losing his grip on the backfield, knowing that he is still the majority rusher. So it's just something to be concerned about. Let's see. After Marshawn Lynch, Buck Allen was a big letdown, but so were all the Ravens. And it looks like they're really trying not to use him. We saw Alex Collins used. We saw Terrence West used. Buck Allen was not seen very often, so that's concerning to me. Jeremy Hill, 2.9. As we mentioned before, I think he's droppable, and especially with what we're hearing with how the new offensive coordinator wants to feature Joe Mixon, which we saw actually quite a bit this past week. So I think Jeremy Hill, he's... pending an injury, he's very much droppable or benchable.
Sit down, get out the way.
Get out the way. Let the young, talented rookie get in there for fantasy. Samaje Perine, 3.4. Obviously, he got hurt. C.J. Anderson, 4.3. Kind of surprised about that. Jamal Charles looked really, really good in this game. Ty Montgomery, 5. He got hurt temporarily, but, I mean, came back in, but was not very productive. Isaiah Crowell, yet another dud performance. 5.4. Look, Isaiah Crowell. I'm going to say, look, we were all high on him coming into the season, and for all good reason. But based on what we are seeing, he's not droppable because, again, he is a lead back. But I just don't think that he is going to be who we thought he was, and that's simply because more than anything, game script. This is a team that is commonly down, and when they're down, Duke Johnson is the one in the game because he's the pass-catching back. I think that Isaiah Crowell, they're not going to be, trying to hold very many leagues, so I don't know how Isaiah Crowell is going to really get you a much more massive performance unless they get out to an early lead or he breaks a couple big plays. So I'm very concerned about Isaiah Crowell, and again, I don't think he's droppable because he's a workhorse back, but I also don't think you can really trade him for anything. So Jason, you were, I think, the highest on him again. We were all pretty high on him, but I know you were tooting the horn about him. What are you doing with Isaiah Crowell right now?
I'm benching him. I'm not going to drop him yet, like you said. He's not droppable. But right now, there's got to be a better option out there, someone that can do a little bit better. I'm having a bad year with my running backs. Like I said, I picked up Marshawn Lynch thinking he'd be great. Isaiah Crowell looked like he was going to be great this year. And the one guy that I did have that is going to be great, David Johnson, and of course he got injured. So I'm having a bad year with running backs, so I'm going to have to sit him down and look for somebody else until he starts bringing himself back to where he needs to be. I think part of it is you got a new system there, you've got a new quarterback, they're trying to get their legs under them, trying to figure out what they want to do. Eventually, like we've said, things are going to settle down, that offensive line is going to gel better, and we're going to start to see Isaiah Crowell start to get yardage again. But for right now, I'd say go ahead and sit him down.
Yeah,
I think it sucks just with injuries, man. I mean, this is still a young team, got a young quarterback, and then when you lose the kid's number one target that he's been feeding, Corey Coleman, he goes down.
Yeah,
defenses are going to, once again, these defensive coordinators are smart. They're going to take away the main threat, which is Isaiah Crowell, and make this kid throw the ball. And right now, Isaiah Crowell's getting stuck. He's getting stuck. He's once again another candidate for the Todd Gurley Award.
And
it's not looking good with these injuries.
And this is coming off a game against the Colts, a game that he should have thrived in.
Should have won.
So he's got the Bengals this week, which is not going to be good. Then he's got the Jets the week after that at home, which should be potentially another one of those big weeks. I mean, if he has a big week there, I'm trying to trade him because after that he's got on the road in Houston, hosting the Titans, hosting the Vikings. So that's a really bad stretch. Then a bye week, and then it's the Lions, which, but then he's got Jacksonville, Bengals again. It's not pretty. So, if he has a big week, I maybe try to bundle him to get, maybe another running back. So, it's really disappointing because, all the signs are there, but with Duke Johnson being present and being the main back in the passing game, we're just not going to see it. Let's move on, though. We're spending way too much time on Isaiah Crowell. Jonathan Stewart, 6.1. We heard and talked all about the Carolina backfield situation going into the week. No surprise here. Lamar Miller, 6.3. Not used very heavily in the passing game either, which was very surprising. And then LaShawn McCoy, 6.9. But it was a tough matchup, so I guess it's to be expected. Can I just point out, the Bills winning that game, nobody saw that coming, right?
No, I did not.
No. I even, because I was watching Red Zone, and then I was just looking through the fantasy stats later on in the day, and I saw I don't remember if I was looking at a Broncos player or a Bills player, but they had, they have the W if the team won or an L if the team lost, and I think it was an L on one of the Broncos players. I was like, wait, what? So I just completely zoned out on it. So yeah, that happened. So yep, those are your running back duds. If your player's name was called there, we feel for you. Let's move on to some more wide receiver sits of the week, or duds rather. Sits are on Friday's show. Cole Beasley, 0.4 points. Cardinals did really good job shutting down the shifty guy there. Amari Cooper, 0.6. Michael Crabtree, 0.7. Both. Man, that's bad when two top receivers on what is perceived to be high-flying offense don't even combine for 2 points. That's bad. But again, this all stems from Michael Crabtree. Wow, Michael Crabtree was part of the problem. Derek Carr's poor performance. Jeremy Maclin, 0.8 points. He got hurt during this game. Kelvin Benjamin, 0.8. He also got really scarily hurt. I saw him go down, and I audibly yelled, "Oh!" So he's okay by all accounts, and we're not sure on a timetable yet. We'll let you know more when we know. Mike Wallace, 1 point. Again, bad game. Rashard Higgins, Cleveland guy who was a big Twitter fantasy darling. A lot of people were really high on him going into this week to fill in the slack of Corey Coleman. 1 point. Not great in a very good matchup.
Not good.
Tyrell Williams, Phillip Rivers struggled. No surprise here, 1.5. And Keenan Allen has been looking really good. He's taking a lot of the volume. Cooper Kupp, 1.7. He was drawing a lot of coverage, which is what allowed Robert Woods and Sammy Watkins to really thrive. Both those guys are a little banged up, so I'm not freaking out about Cooper Kupp. It was a bad week. It's bound to happen. He's a rookie. Terrell Pryor, I am freaking out about, though. This is yet another bad week. Terrell Pryor, a guy who had a really good offseason, a really good training camp, a really good preseason, he has looked horrifically bad through the first 3 weeks. This is a guy who I'm definitely trying to move, I think. It's just not working out in Washington. And this, I think, also comes into the fact that we all try to take into account, this is a better situation, but on a new team with new coordinators, with new players around him, it doesn't always work out. So Terrell Pryor's scary to me. Could he still turn it around? Easily. He's a freak athlete. He's pretty darn talented, but he's concerning to me. Are you guys feeling the same way, or are you going to kind of pump the brakes and just see how it plays out?
I'm trying to move him.
I'm trying to
move him as quick as possible.
So we agree there.
You got 3 weeks, and you've been nothing but a disappointment, man. Dropping passes that you should have making.
Yep.
I mean, for me, I'm just disappointed and frustrated because, here's my thing with guys that, put workout stuff on Twitter and everything like that. Look, okay, all that is cool and that's great, but you got to back it up in the game. And that's something that Terrell Pryor hasn't yet to do. I mean, I'm seeing training camp videos of you burning Josh Norman and all these other people. You're facing corners that are probably not on Josh Norman's level, and yet you're still not making catches. You're dropping open touchdowns. You're out of rhythm with your quarterback, and you don't show any promise that you're going to get to that level. You got people like Ryan Grant, the 4th guy on the depth chart, getting more touches and more receptions than you. Are you freaking kidding me?
Yep.
Terrell Pryor.
Two catches on 4 targets for 19 yards. Between all 3 weeks that we've had so far, he doesn't even have a combined 12 points in standard leagues. So that's pretty bad. I don't know what you can get for him. Maybe you're waiting for a big week, but that's probably not going to be this week against the Chiefs on the road in Arrowhead.
Maybe a kicker.
Maybe a kicker. Dang.
Kicker hurting.
Cold as ice, CJ. Moving on, though. Marvin Jones, 2.4. Kind of surprised about that. That hurt. Martavis Bryant, 3 points. Not very good, but he also missed by, I think it was only a couple feet, a possible, 70-plus yard touchdown bomb from right at the beginning of the game. So I think that, again, they're getting their rapport, they're getting their timing. I think that this will be a play that hits more than it misses as we move further into the season. I'm not freaking out about Martavis Bryant yet. Jameson Crowder, 3.2. Also surprised about that. Dante Moncrief, we told you that he's probably benchable, and still seems to be the case until Andrew Luck gets back, 4.4. Jarvis Landry, 4.8. Nobody really had a great game in Miami, so not a surprise there. Danny Amendola, we already talked about a little bit of a letdown. We thought he was going to jump back in, but he seems to be being eased in and splitting that slot role with Chris Hogan. So, it's too bad. 4.8 if you started him. Devontae Adams, 6 points. Jordy Nelson feasted. Devontae Adams, he didn't have as good of a week. Jordan Matthews, 6.1. Keenan Allen, 6.1. Marquise Lee, 6.5. And Mike Evans, 6.7. Not great performances from any of those players. They let you down. Though, to be fair, Mike Evans, he was being covered by Xavier Rhodes, who is obviously a fantastic corner.
That guy.
Did you guys see the highlights where he was freaking? Because I was actually watching this game where he was freaking out and knocking over coolers and kicking stuff and slamming helmets. He was having a full-blown temper tantrum.
Very, very mature.
Yeah.
Good and mad. That's what I call good and mad.
Yep. So at least my set of the week fell in there. Moving on to our tight ends, where we're less than successful. Jack Doyle, my start of the week, -0.4.
Yep.
Jacoby Brissett in a game against
you guys never asking me why I didn't like Jack Doyle? That's why. Right there. There's a good reason. That's all I need.
But this wasn't his
Not a Jack
fault.
Doyle fan.
No, this wasn't his
I know.
fault. This was literally Jacoby Brissett.
It's never Jack Doyle's fault.
Well, no,
Jack Doyle rules. It's never his fault.
No. This was Jacoby Brissett feeling the need to run in 2 touchdowns this week. So,
I show up the legs, man.
Got to show it. So that obviously killed all the pass catchers, except for one amazing play that T.Y. Hilton did. Hunter Henry, this is what I was worried about, and this was CJ's start. 0.0 points. Goose eggs. I'm sorry, he's droppable to me. I don't know if you still feel differently, CJ, but
I'm gonna pump the brakes on that, man. Look at the position. I mean, you learn off the list when we've been talking about this exhaustively. There's top 5 guys. There's top 5 guys you're gonna get consistent play out of the tight end position. So if you can get a starting tight end that's in a high volume pass offense, you gotta try to hold on to him. I know this is a terrible week. I know the feeling. I started him. So just to see this 0, it was disgusting. But their schedule gets a little better. I don't like him this upcoming week against the Eagles. But outside of that, there's some good matchups, and I'm going to keep Hunter Henry.
I'm just saying, the tight end position is a dumpster fire this year, and this is what we were concerned about. A lot of talented guys,
every year.
None of it's working out. And it's bad. You have all these big names that I'm going to list off rapid fire because we are starting to run out of time that were duds. Yet your studs of the week, 2 of them, Mercedes Lewis, owned in 0.1% of leagues, and Ryan Griffin owned in 0.2% of leagues. So, it's streamable, but you're taking a lot of chances here. Let's rapid fire through this so we can get through the rest of the show, though. The rest of your duds: Travis Kelce, 0.1. Jason Witten, 0.3. Kyle Rudolph, 0.4. Ed Dixon, 0.8. Austin Hooper, 0.9. Eric Ebron, 0.9. Those were all tight ends that did not score 1 point. Besides that, Martellus Bennett, 1.2. Julius Thomas, 1.6. Zach Miller, 1.7. Virgil Green, 1.8. J.C. James, who also got hurt, 1.9. Really bad. Jason Sit of the Week, Kobe Fleener, 2.1. Good call there. Antonio Gates, 2.1. Delaney Walker, 3.1. And C.J. Sit of the Week, Evan Ingram, 4.5. So, did some good stuff there, guys. And a lot of this was injury. A lot of this was game script. A lot of this they were blocking. A lot of this was who knows. The tight ends are falling apart. It's all case by case. We expect big things in the future, but the position as a whole, this is why I don't draft tight ends early, unless it's Rob Gronkowski, who's used as just a big red zone threat wide receiver more than anything. It's just not worth it. It's too inconsistent. But anyway, let's move on to our top headlines from around the league. We already basically hit on most of these topics going through the player breakdown, so we'll hit these really quick. At the quarterback position, Indianapolis Colts head coach Chuck Pagano said that it is a possibility that Andrew Luck practices this week. So that's good news there potentially, though he has still not been cleared but all signs are positive, and it does still seem like they are eyeing a week 6 return for Andrew Luck. So good news there. I've heard a lot of people speculating that they're worried about him because, we see what's going on with Cam Newton. But I think this is a different situation because they are babying Andrew Luck, where Cam Newton clearly still isn't right. So I think that when Andrew Luck's back, I think he starts for me. I'm starting him with confidence. Do you guys feel differently?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And I know I completely can see it. I mean, based on what we're seeing this year, players switching teams, players coming back from injury, players not being right, it's an easy argument to go one way or the other. But I'm assuming with how much they are babying Andrew Luck and how much more time he's had to recover, that I hope that they would not be starting him unless they were confident in him. So if it's a good matchup and he's coming back, I think I start him. What is there to lose? We see all these big-name quarterbacks who are putting up dud weeks for us. Yeah, let's move on. Minnesota quarterback Sam Bradford's status is still uncertain for week number 4. We kind of talked about that before. We will let you know when we know more. Obviously, that impacts the entire Minnesota Vikings offense. Running back position. Los Angeles Chargers running back Melvin Gordon is dealing with a bone bruise, which forced him out of the game. Fears were that it was going to be much more severe than that, but turns out that that's all it was. It's said to be very minor and that he did want to go back in. All that are good signs. He is expected to play in week number 4, so good news there. Chicago Bears running back Jordan Howard, and this is what falls in line with what we were talking about before, just frustrates the heck out of me. He was completely absent from the Chicago Bears injury report for week number 4. So he went from being in a sling this time last week to being probably not playing to putting up a monster week and now not even on the injury report. So the Chicago Bears lie. John Fox is a liar, which we should really honestly know by now. Philadelphia Eagles running back, this is sad news, Darren Sproles. He not only broke his arm, but he also tore his ACL, and both of this happened on the same hit in the same play. So really depressing because this most likely means that was the last, because he already said he was hanging it up after this year. We most likely, therefore, have seen the last snap of Darren Sproles' career, which is honestly very sad. Incredible player. Great PPR running back. You guys, you think he wants to come back and prove anything after this, or you think he's hanging up the cleats?
I mean, you never know. It depends on the player. I mean, he's been a fantastic guy and a great player in the NFL. Left a mark on the position. I mean, it's just incredibly crazy. I mean, every small back now you see, you compare him to Darren Sproles, and everybody that commentators talk about. But it's just going to depend on him. I mean, he could be like a Steve Smith, originally said he's going to hang it up, and then, just get that dog in him, and it says, no, I'm not going to go out like that. But you just don't know. It depends on the play.
Jason?
I mean, I would like to see him come back because this is not how any player wants to end their career. This is they see a full season. Maybe they diminish. But this is rough, so I would like to see him come back. I don't know if he will, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget Darren Sproles. I think it was the 2008 season when he was with the Chargers. I wanted to say San Diego, but there was San Diego then, so I can say that. He was with the San Diego Chargers. Yeah. And, I mean, he went out and he put up just some monster performances in the postseason that year. And that's when he caught my eye. I was like, oh, this guy's going to be special. Never truly got the real opportunity to be a workhorse back anywhere. I mean, he only had one season where he topped 300 or 400 yards, rather. Actually, no, he had 2. He had 438 in 2016 with the Eagles, and then 1 year where he got 608. Or no, 603 with the Saints. But obviously much more of a receiving back. Very talented, used in many aspects of the game. I honestly hope we see more of him. But odds are I assume that we have seen the end of his great career. So, hats off to you, Darren Sproles, and hope for a speedy recovery. Let's see. We have what we already talked about with Samaje Perine. He was diagnosed with a bruised hand, not a broken hand. So he is day-to-day. Rob Kelly is day-to-day. We talked about Mac Brown being on the roster, so that's something to be concerned about. But really the only player on that offense who is productive thus far in the running back position is Chris Thompson. So something to keep an eye out on. And New York Jets running back Matt Forte. He had an X-ray on his toe, and it came back negative, so that's good news there for Matt Forte. Bad news for Bilal Powell owners. At the wide receiver position, Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Julio Jones is dealing with a lower back injury. He is expected to be limited in practice this week, but is expected to play. Seattle Seahawks wide receiver Doug Baldwin. Shocker, right? That's part of owning Julio Jones. He will be hurt. He will be banged up. Doug Baldwin will have an MRI on his groin. He is. It's a concern, but I think they're expecting him to play. We will obviously update you guys as we know more and we see the practice reports. Carolina Panthers wide receiver Kelvin Benjamin. God, this was scary. He got an MRI on his knee after a very serious tackle from behind. He was dragged down with what I think was a horse collar tackle, and the guy landed on his leg. He looked all types of twisted, but his ankle and his heel got out just in time to apparently avoid any serious damage. The MRI showed no structural damage, so that's all good news. No timetable on his return, but something to keep an eye on because there goes another top receiver for Cam Newton. All the more reason why I'm moving on from him. And let's move on to the tight end position where Cincinnati Bengals tight end Tyler Eifert will reportedly now miss multiple weeks with his back injury. So, Tyler Eifert, there you go. Shocker, a guy who was also always banged up. So, powered through those top headlines, but I think we got the point across. Most of these guys we talked about back in the studs and duds. So, let's move on to our topic of the day, which is our top waiver wire targets for week number 4. Let's start at the running back position where, again, I am buying in. I'm still not a believer in the volume, but if I can plug him in my flex position, and if I need a boom-bust player, I'm not looking for that floor, but I'm looking for that high ceiling. I know I need a big week to win. Chris Thompson has shown to be that guy. He's the number 3 running back in fantasy through 3 weeks of the 2017 season. He's already owned in 46.1% of leagues, so he's a little bit up there for us, but it's under 50%. Odds are there's a 50-50 chance he's out there. So go grab him, go stash him. If Rob Kelly or Samaje Perine don't suit up, or both of them don't suit up, he is a guy who is going to have an amazing opportunity, and he has shown that all he needs is a little bit of space in an open field to turn it upfield and get you monster performances. So, yes, I am officially buying into Chris Thompson, though tentatively. CJ, your guy.
I like it. Now, listen, like we mentioned earlier, man, I mean, terrible to hear about what happened with Darren Sproles, man, and I hope he heals up quickly, man. You know, he had a great career. But in NFL, it's always about next man up. And a guy that took and seized his opportunity and continued to get touches in this game and splitting with LeGarrette Blount is Wendell Smallwood. He was looking really good, got the opportunities. Doug Peterson likes him. They give him opportunities to get in there. So I suggest that you go get you some Wendell Smallwood. He's only owned in 2.1% of leagues, so that's very, very available by my stature. So, yeah, that's what I look at.
Yeah, we were talking about him as a deep sleeper since the preseason, and he led the team in snaps last week, so I really like that going forward. Jason, your guy.
So there's a guy that I talked about in preseason before the NFL draft and then after the NFL draft. Deontay Foreman over there in Houston. You know, this is a big guy. He's a 3-down back, in my opinion. He's going to be a 3-down back. Lamar Miller is a very, very talented back, but frequently injured. So this is somebody that, you know, you want to look at possibly stashing. He's only owned in 3.3% of leagues. And guess what? He actually scored more points this week than Lamar Miller did. Lamar Miller's not having the best opening to his season so far. And so I think we're going to start seeing more Deontay Foreman unless Lamar Miller really picks his play up. And he's trending in the right direction. He's done better every week. This week he actually had 65 yards receiving against New England. So everything's kind of trending in that direction for Foreman. This is somebody that you definitely want to grab, put on your bench, wait to see what happens, and I think you won't be disappointed.
I wish I could argue that point, but I have to, based on what we saw last week, I kind of have to agree with you. He was used more in the passing situations and everything. I still think Lamar Miller is the guy to own and the guy to start, but D'Onta Foreman is definitely worth the stash at this point. I agree with that. Let's move on to the wide receiver position, where I am streaming or picking up Sterling Shepard. He's owned in 15.1% of leagues. Guys, Sterling Shepard, he looked good. He was a guy that I was very high on last season.
Does he now?
He does. He got a touchdown in this game. It could have been and should have been too. If he had completed the catch, he would have had 2 touchdowns. He looks good, and obviously he's a guy who has a rapport with, hopefully, a guy who took a step this week in Eli Manning, who had a very good performance, but it took until the fourth quarter to really get it going. So Sterling Shepard is a guy who I definitely think is worth streaming this week, especially if your wide receiver went down with an injury. He could definitely give you a decent floor with a high ceiling, as we saw this past week. CJ, your guy.
Man, Griffin, I just want to let you know I enjoyed that pick. That's a really good pick, sir.
I know, right? That's why I made it.
Really, sir. No, listen to me. Awesome pick.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Keep moving. We're out of time.
Very welcome. My guy is Paul Richardson, a guy out of the Seattle Seahawks. Look, I've always been a big fan of Paul Richardson, especially after that playoff game between them and the Detroit Lions. The dude showed some incredible catches. He got open, and he's got a good rapport with my man Russell Wilson right now. And you already know the trend, what they're doing. They're getting away from the run, and they're making it solely about the pass. This guy's getting open. Yes, look, you look at his history these last couple of weeks. Didn't have a good game against the Packers, but these last 2 games, he's gotten touchdowns and he's gotten yards. I'm telling you, go pick up some Paul Richardson. This kid's going to ball out here on out.
Jason.
Yep. So my guy is Alan Hearns over there in Jacksonville. You know, I've been excited about Jacksonville now throughout the offseason. I like what they've been doing. And I had said, and I think me and Griffin both said, if Blake Bortles has a good year, a lot of these weapons are going to have a really good year. So, so far, Alan Hearns has had himself a pretty decent year. 2 touchdowns on the year so far. He's been pretty consistent past 2 weeks, 14.2 points against Tennessee, and then, of course, against Baltimore, 8 points because of a touchdown. Now, again, he hasn't gotten a lot of volume, and I know a lot of people are going to be looking for Marquise Lee, who's going to get more targets, supposedly, within this offense. But the thing is, if I'm looking for this kind of a waiver wire addition, I'm looking for more upside, and like I mentioned, this guy has a nose for the end zone. So that's why I look at Alan Hearns. I see what he's done past couple of weeks. He's got some really nice matchups coming up. The Jets, for example, in this coming up week. So yeah, it's definitely someone that I think I'd take a look at.
All right, and with that, let's move on to our tight end position, where I am going to move on to a guy I already talked about because he was a top performer last week, and I don't think he's going to always be a top performer, but I think the volume is there to at least be productive week in and week out, and that is Ryan Griffin, only owned in 0.2% of leagues. And no, it's not because his name is Griffin, but literally because they use the tight end, as I already mentioned, a lot in Houston.
That's the only reason why.
It didn't hurt. But, you know, again, tight ends are used a lot in Houston. They're the safety blanket for a young quarterback, which they have, and their only real pass-catching weapon that they have in that offense that's any form of consistent or not injured is DeAndre Hopkins. And when he's not open, there's a plethora of other guys, but look to the tight end, look to Ryan Griffin, and I think that he, on volume alone, will get you a decent floor every single week. He is definitely a guy in deeper leagues I'm looking to pick up, a streaming option, or whatever the case may be, especially going forward as we start moving into our bye week. So Ryan Griffin, a guy I am looking to acquire if I can.
I got you. I see that. Shameless, by the way. So listen, my guy is, Evan Ingram. Look, yes, he didn't do good for me last week, but I told you. And just like Kevin Hart's wife, once you find out he was cheating, I'm sticking with him. Ryan Griffin right now. My man, Evan Ingram, he's got a good matchup this week, and he's still only owned in 14.7% of leagues. So that means he's still out there, just sitting out there in that free agency. Go pick him up.
Jason.
There's a guy that Griffin mentioned earlier in the season, Charles Clay. Now, the thing about the tight end position, and if you listen, what's that?
Said I love Charles Clay.
Love Charles Clay. If you know anything about me, and you've been listening to the show for any length of period of time, you know that I hate the freaking tight end position. I absolutely hate it. It's the worst position in football as far as fantasy goes because it is so unpredictable and just so volatile. It's rough. So Charles Clay, however, over the last 3 weeks, he's had one bad week against Carolina, and in the other 2 weeks he scored 9.9 points and 11.3 points. That is pretty good consistency. Those are touchdowns, obviously. So, and just like most tight ends, he's touchdown dependent. So I picked this guy up because he is getting volume. He is getting passes going his way, not getting tons of yardage. He is more of a traditional tight end, somebody that gets the passes in the red zone, and he's been doing a very good job of that. And I think that they're going to continue using him in that way. So I would definitely go out and get me some Charles Clay, put him on your bench, start him if the matchup is good.
He caught 6 of Tyrod Taylor's 20 completions this week, so he is very involved in the offense there. I like it a lot. I actually am using him in our league of record, which is a 2 tight end league, so there you go. All right, so that is going to do it for us today. Please make sure you guys tune in on Friday when we will be doing all of our starts and sits for week number 4. Hopefully the games will go actually to game script this week. Remember, if you love the show, you want to keep getting us every single week, just subscribe wherever you're listening right now. iTunes, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, YouTube, various other streaming services. We're there, and then we come right to you, and we're going to help you every single week. All this news, all the headlines, all the ads, all the drops, all the waiver wire targets, all the starts, all the sits, so on and so forth. If that's not enough for you and you want more, head over to patreon.com/thefantasyfootballfanatics. Get yourself bonus episodes every single week, including this week, where our topic is going to be buy low and sell high candidates. So that should be a lot of fun. And of course, follow the show. If you need breaking news in between recordings or leading up to game time, you want to know the injury updates, who's starting, who's in, who's out, that is on Twitter at the FF Fanatics. That's the easiest way to do it, guys. Or you can follow us individually. I'm at G Palmer FFF, CJ is at CJ Hickman 89, and Jason is at Jason Cabrera 13. So with that, we are out of here. Have a great week. We'll see you guys on Friday. Any parting thoughts before we sign off?
Hey man, look, week 3 is about to be behind us. It's going to week 4.
Indeed. Jason?
Just be patient. It's going to get better.
It is. Wow, that was really depressed. All right, so yeah, we're out of here. Take care, guys. Bye.
Stay away from the bridges, ladies. Get off that tank, but I'm almost at the finish line, so I can't stop now. I don't really know where I'm headed, 'cause I'm enjoying the ride. Just gonna roll till I drop and ride till I die.